Hi everyone, so my name's Emily, and today I'm going to be introducing a condition to you known as hemispatial neglect. So when I ask you to think about the word attention, what comes to mind? Maybe you're thinking about multitasking, or maybe you're thinking about concentrating really hard on a difficult task, or maybe you're thinking about how you're struggling to pay attention to me right now. What we often don't think about is how our brain is constantly paying attention to the world around us. It's taking all this information in and then focusing on what's important and relevant to us. But what would happen if our brain stopped paying attention? How would this affect our lives? We often see our brain as being this perfect little machine that takes in all of the sights and sounds around us, and then it shoots out what we would expect to be an accurate representation of the world around us. But today I'm going to challenge that assumption. How do we know that what we see is what everyone else sees? And how do we know that what we're looking at is actually what it seems? So I want you to meet Lucy. Lucy was just in a car accident, and she's woken up in the hospital, and she's asking for her mom. The doctor appears to be looking at an empty corner of the room, and all of a sudden her mom appears, as if by magic, next to the doctor and says, "Lucy, didn't you see me? I was standing in that corner of the room, the left-hand side." Now Lucy is freaking out. She has no idea what's going on, because the left side of the room appeared to her as being empty. Lucy's symptoms are similar to somebody who's been diagnosed with hemispatial neglect. In this disorder, individuals ignore one entire side of the world. Essentially, the brain forgets to process information from one viewpoint. So individuals with hemispatial neglect, they focus on a small fraction of the world, usually biased to either the extreme right side or the extreme left. In Lucy's case, she's only processing information from the extreme right side. Her brain is then taking this information, generalizing it, and telling her that this represents the entire world. So information in our brain is processed contralaterally. This means that information from the left-hand side is processed by our right hemisphere, and vice versa. Because of this, we can probably assume that Lucy has suffered damage to her right hemisphere. So let's look into this further. So individuals who suffer from hemispatial neglect, it's more prominent in individuals who've had damage to the right hemisphere, because this area of the brain deals with our spatial memory. It occurs in a third of stroke patients, as well as individuals who have suffered severe brain trauma. One of the main regions that's involved is our inferior parietal lobe, and this brain region deals with our higher attentional processing, as well as our spatial sense and navigation. Other regions that are involved are the superior temporal gyrus, as well as our basal ganglia and hypothalamus. And they are involved with our sensory and motor control, as well as our learning abilities. So a lot of you are still probably asking the question, well, how can you just ignore one side of the world? And how would you not know that something's wrong? Well, you would think that, okay, if this is our normal view of the world, and then this is what a hemispatial neglect patient would see, you would think that they would only see the right side, and the left side would just maybe be black. But this isn't the case, because our sensory processes are still working. We're still receiving input from our auditory and visual systems, but our brain is just choosing to ignore it. Our brain is only taking the processing information from the right-hand side, and then it's generalizing it and saying this is what the entire world consists of. So people who suffer from hemispatial neglect often have no idea that they even have this disorder, because what they think is the world, they think it's the entire picture and not just a part of it. Okay, so for example, if we ask Lucy to divide this line in half, this is what we would most typically get. To us, this line appears to mark more of the quarter region of the line rather than the midpoint, but to Lucy, this is the halfway point of the line that she sees. Another example is if we ask Lucy to fill in numbers on a clock on this circle right here, and what we would see is that all of her numbers are squished onto the right-hand side, but to her, it appears like a normal clock. The same thing would happen if we asked her to copy this model of a house. We see that her drawing is perfectly detailed on the right-hand side, but the left-hand side fails to exist at all. So those were both examples of input neglect, where Lucy's having difficulty with processing sensory information. There's also something that's known as output neglect. This is when our brain not only fails to acknowledge one half of the world, but it also fails to acknowledge one half of our body. Essentially, Lucy's brain doesn't acknowledge that her left arm and her left leg exist. When patients who have hemispatial neglect look in the mirror, The limbs that they're seeing are not their actual limbs. They're their brain's projection of what should actually be there. So this means that there's a disconnect between the brain and the limbs so that they're not actually able to move them and use them in their everyday lives. Now, hemispatial neglect is actually a lot more common than you would think, but we still don't know the causes of it, which means that there's very few treatment options. One of the most important treatment options is being aware that you have the disorder. If a person is constantly reminding themselves that they're only seeing half of the world, then they can constantly tell themselves to look further and try and force their brain to see the other half of the other unattended side of the world. Now, they can do this using something known as pop-out effects, which are automatic attentional processes whereby something captures your attention immediately. So, for example, if a person wore a brightly colored sock on their unattended leg, or there was a flashing light or a ringing bell on the unattended side of the room, we hope that we can automatically capture their attention and they can reconnect with the unattended side. Now, earlier in the presentation, I mentioned how we assume that our brain is this all-knowing and all-powerful structure. But after looking at hemispatial neglect, we can see that this is not the case. Our brain can make mistakes, and it's also able to create elaborate illusions. So this kind of creates a very interesting combination and raises a very interesting question. The fact that is what we're seeing actually there? Is how we view the world actually what's there, or is it just an elaborate illusion that's made up by our brain, and we have no idea what's actually going on? And then I just want you to remember, the next time somebody says, you're only seeing one side of the story, remember, for some people, that's all they can see. Thank you.